which is very, very cool. And we did not have a cafe last September, but we do have one now as part of Flexible, and I'm really excited to have you all here. Who has not been to a Hacking Health cafe before? Sometime we need to do data on who you all are and how you found us. So welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about Hacking Health. Hacking Health is a global movement that started about 4 years ago. Started in Montreal. Practitioners and technologists got together and did a little experiment and said, okay, if we have a couple of healthcare challenges, what happens if we put these people together and we see what they can do? And phenomenal things came out of it. And 4 years later, Hacking Health is now a global movement with chapters across Canada and the US, Guadalajara, Lyon, France, Australia. We are everywhere. Insert evil laugh. And what we're trying to do is bringing together healthcare practitioners who know what the healthcare challenges are, and there's a few of them, and technologists who can solve all of those problems. We jokingly say that we've given ourselves till 2017 to fix everything. No pressure. And our cafe and our meetups are really to bring together all the healthcare professionals in the Waterloo, Wellington area as often as we can, as much as we can. I come from a healthcare background in speech therapy, working in Toronto for 20 plus years. Yes. And when I came here to the tech capital of Canada, I was really surprised that there wasn't a Hacking Health chapter here. And as I've been meeting people in the healthcare industry, I realized there's an incredible resource of healthcare practitioners in the schools and in the community here. So welcome. Again, I'm going to push pizza on you guys. It's healthy. And water. Someone asked if we were ever going to have beer at our event, and we'll talk. So today is a little bit different. Typically, some people have come up to me and said, I want to see what you do at your cafes. So typically, we have 3 or 4 presenters from the community, and they may be a healthcare practitioner, or they may be a technologist who has an idea or is working on something or has a challenge that they want to meet, and they come up and talk about what they're working on, and they put forward their ask. They may be looking for software developers, they may be looking to connect with a chiropractor. So this is a place, if you're working on something that you think might be a good idea, it probably is a good idea, and we can help you connect with each other. Social media stuff. So we are on Twitter. Our website is hackinghealth.ca, and that will get you to every Hacking Health chapter around the world. Just search for Waterloo, you can find us. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram currently, I keep forgetting. And our hashtags are always those ones that are up there, Hacking Health KW and KW Awesome. Tonight, Point Click Care is paid for your pizza. We'll work on the beer from them. So I want to say thank you to them. Tonight we have a little bit different because we have one guest speaker who's going to be totally awesome. No pressure. And we couldn't get a rocking chair for him, so we got a comfy chair for him. He's going to be talking about user experience because this is Flexible Week. And I love that because I've talked about healthcare practitioners, I've talked about technologists, but I haven't talked about patients. And that's a crucial thing to whatever we're doing. And we are teaming up with a movement called Patients Included. So we'll be talking more about that over the next couple of months. We have an October cafe at the School of Pharmacy. We have a November cafe at the School of Medicine. We have another event, small event, I kind of need to breathe, in November, towards the end of November, starting on November 18th, 19th, and 20th. It's our first hackathon. If anybody's just come from Hack the North, anybody? Okay, we're going to be smaller than them. We're going to be a little bit smaller than Hack the North. We're still looking for sponsors. We do have a presenting sponsor for our hackathon, and it's Baycross from Toronto. So we have a lot of people coming in from Toronto. The theme for our hackathon is going to be aging, and so we'll be sharing more information about that over the next couple of weeks with you. And I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. And he says he doesn't need a formal introduction because we're very casual here. So I'll just put you in the hands of Patrick now. Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah. We're just going to do a bit of technical stuff in the background.
Because we're highly technical people.
We're
If you've
highly
been here
technical.
before, you know that I'm highly technical. I'm not.
So what is that? Okay, I think we got it. Can I? Awesome. So as a side note, while Sarah said that all the problems are going to be solved by 2017,
I know you're going for a longer term.
today I'm going to be talking about a piece that's about what healthcare looks like in 2025, and unfortunately it's not all solved. Sorry about that.
In Kitchener, while we
Great. Now, as a side note, just before I get started, George here mentioned to me that he's going to be recording the whole session. So if you can all laugh every time I say anything funny really loudly so it makes me look good on the internet, that would be really appreciated. Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, first off, well, number one, thank you all for joining today. I'm actually going to start today's talk about the future of healthcare by fundamentally undermining everything I'm going to be talking about. Because there's a funny reality that nobody can really predict the future. You take a quote like this, trying to predict the future is like trying to drive down a country road at night with no lights while looking out the back window. And you have everyone from famous physicists to professional athletes to actors commenting about how the future is absolutely impossible to try and predict. And to start off, I'm going to say that both myself and the team who I'm here representing today, we 100% agree. No one can predict exactly what will happen in the future. And you know, what's funny though, in contrast to that, is I can say with relative certainty that tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up. I'm probably going to wake up in my bed in Toronto. I'm going to spend a little bit of time tomorrow morning hanging out with my daughter. I'm going to go into work. So I'm fairly certain that that's going to happen. But there's still a chance that, hey, maybe I'll wake up sick. Maybe after all these years, my mom's going to call me tomorrow morning to tell me that she won the Lotto 649 overnight and she's taking me to Maui. That would be obviously really nice. And of course, there's that sort of frightening reality that maybe I won't wake up at all. And you know, that's the funny thing about the future is when we think about it, right? When we think about the future, if we think about every variation of what can possibly happen, it's obviously really daunting and it can scare you into taking absolutely no action. But alternatively, if we listen to the signals that are going on around us, right now I'm feeling pretty good, for example. Right now, my mom has gone on 15 years without actually winning the lottery. I can be relatively certain that that those disruptions are not actually going to happen. And so, you know, if we listen to those signals around us, if we try and anticipate what might actually occur, we'll be prepared for the most likely scenarios. And so, you know, while absolutely you can't predict the future, just because you can't predict it doesn't mean that there isn't value in trying to anticipate what's likely going to happen and to make sure that the design that you're working on is resilient if it actually does. So today I'm actually going to share with you the story of my crazy team at Idea Couture and the outputs of us actually trying to predict the future of care, specifically the year 2025. And of course, I got to start a little bit about me, since there was no formal introduction. So who am I as Patrick Glinsky? I head up Idea Couture's health practice. Idea Couture, we're a global innovation consultancy based in Toronto, a little over 10 years old now. And you know, aside from what I've done at Idea Couture, it was a little over 15 years ago when I first kind of started my career in user experience. I worked at 2 different digital agencies in the past. And in those agencies, and as well as my time at Idea Couture, I've worked on a pretty wide variety of problems. Everything from developing social crowdsourcing platforms with MIT to like working on a loyalty program for recycling, to building other like community change platforms in Canada, to designing Halloween candy. I had a really kind of broad and diverse set of experiences. And like any designer, I kind of measured my value in terms of the number of people I had the ability to impact, the number of lives I was able to touch based around interesting problems. And it was about 5 years ago, acting as a service designer within Idea Couture, when I got what can only be called as my sort of dream brief. I had a pharmaceutical client come to me and say, Patrick, we want you to help us support the experience of living with a certain specific chronic disease. And to me as a designer, hey, that was a really, really exciting challenge. It was a new vertical, it was a new topic to deal with. It was really the kind of thing that gets you excited because you have the ability to touch and impact people's lives. So I'll fast forward to starting that project. Of course, we went through the planning process. We looked at how to implement a great human-centered design program. And I was in this little boutique hotel in Montreal, in Old Montreal. Beautiful, warm, nice. I go up to one of their little meeting rooms. It's all laid out with nice pizza and water, actually. I sat down at a table and I was preparing myself to meet with 5 people living with psoriasis. So for those of you who don't know psoriasis, anybody familiar with the condition? So it's an immunology condition and it affects a lot of people. And so I was actually meeting specifically with people with severe psoriasis, which means that at some point in time they're covered by, their body is roughly 80% covered. And it manifests itself often with kind of itchy, scaly skin. It's the most kind of common manifestation. So I'm sitting in this room preparing to talk to people living with psoriasis. And of course I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about their skin. We're going to talk about the frustrations of being itchy. We're going to go through all these topics, and I'm excited to learn about it. So the folks come in, they sit down at the table, and within the first 15 minutes, literally not one of them did not talk about thinking about killing themselves in the last 24 hours. So in that instant, my world fundamentally changed, to be honest. I went from, absolutely loving design and being excited about how I can apply it into all of these different ways, to now understanding that design had a purpose for me, that it could be incredibly impactful for people's lives. So even though, fast forward several months later, Idea Couture's health practice was founded. It was actually in that moment, I think, that our practice was founded. And we really created a mission to be agents of change in the context of healthcare and bring really great design to people who are living with different types of conditions and intersections with the health system. That set of interactions, and sorry, I get emotional when I talk about that experience because inevitably it's deeply personal, but that set of interactions really gave me the passion to get our practice started. And for us, we absolutely aspire to be agents of change in healthcare and to bring the set of experiences and the learning that we have from speaking with people with diseases, from the other kind of thought leadership pieces that we do, to folks like yourselves who have an incredibly diverse set of skills. You have the ability to all lead and create change. You also have the ability to touch people's lives on a regular basis, and I don't say patients, I really do mean people's lives on a regular basis. And so I'm just really thankful and excited to be here with all of you today. So sorry, that's a little too personal about my background, but sincerely, thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. So I described how that program in psoriasis changed my life and caused me to found a practice within Idea Couture. A practice that's now a little bit more than 20 practitioners, a variety of people with health technology backgrounds, medical backgrounds. We're actually one of Canada's largest hirer of anthropologists in a non-academic setting as well, because we really believe in applying social science into the delivery of care. But beyond that kind of founding moment, those interactions with people with psoriasis taught me 2 other important lessons about chronic disease. First, that I believe every chronic disease comes with a tremendous amount of disruption to people's lives. So, of course, nobody aspires to be diagnosed with a chronic disease, but the minute that you are, all of a sudden it puts a new rhythm to your life, a new set of structures that you need to interact with, which were fundamentally different than the ones that you thought you were going to interact with the day before. In parallel to that, we also learned that beyond just disruption, people experience a tremendous amount of loss. Now, that loss spans a lot of different categories. On one hand, obviously, there's financial considerations. So, for example, the folks that I spoke with on that day in Montreal, many of them had lost their jobs because of the condition that they had, and of course, interacting with the healthcare system meant that they had additional costs that they were regularly incurring as well. But beyond that, just kind of employment and financial impact, what's amazing as you speak to more and more people living with different types of chronic conditions is the personal, emotional loss that they have, the friends that they actually lose through the process. It's incredibly dramatic and personal to talk to people about these types of things, but this loss is constant and frequent, and it never really gives back. And fundamentally, what we believe now is that the experience of being diagnosed with a chronic disease challenges one's sense of self. So fast forward to today, and now my team has studied close to 50 different chronic conditions, and we can say with confidence that regardless of what diagnosis somebody incurs, it will fundamentally challenge somebody's ability to balance their identity as both a person and a patient. And it's this tension between personhood and patienthood with a healthcare system that inscribes on people that they need to become good patients and behave in a certain patient way that we really want to overcome as a practice. So why the quote? So this quote may obviously be romantically true, but losing the sense of oneself can really send people into a crisis and can make them fundamentally challenge or can fundamentally disrupt how they understand their own place in the world. And that, in and of itself, is something that we as a practice are trying to overcome. So this idea of loss is incredibly important for us to understand as stewards of care. If people have lost a lot, I would argue that we also have a responsibility to make sure that they don't lose more. So even if we aren't all designers, we can certainly appreciate what good design is, right? Good design just kind of fits with our lives, right? It works into the context of our lives and it simplifies how we do the things that we do. It doesn't disrupt our flow. In health, absolutely that remains true, but we would argue that good design also helps somebody regain their sense of personhood. We're really helping people manage the disruptions and the losses in their lives, or essentially hacking, sorry to use the term given where we are, but hacking their lives to find new identities as a person living with the disease instead of as a patient. And we see this time and time again that people try and regain this sense of self by adjusting their lives. Everything from adding functional aids to adopting new behaviors to taking on new coping mechanisms, changing their jobs, joining a gym, joining a church. It's endless, but ultimately many of these activities are really there to try and support the emergence of these individuals as people, not just patients. And as designers, in parallel to that, we use our time and energy to try and help people live with this new identity so that the moment that a doctor says, you've been diagnosed with X or you have X, we can help them regain their sense of self. Now, it may seem trivial, but as a former agency person and somebody who used to spend a lot of time in web design and web user experience design, I actually had a lot of my work thrown away on a regular basis. Again, if you've worked in web design, I'm sure many of you have, you know that it's a 2-year or 2.5-year cycle where you build something and then optimize, yeah, throw away because there's a new technology or something fundamentally new or a new set of user experience paradigms. And for yourself, obviously it's heartbreaking as a designer to see that happen. But I actually, as a result of many of the experiences that I've had, become really obsessed with this idea of throwing away design, in particular in healthcare. And I really challenged my team to try and create design that won't just disappear on people. Or how do we help create design that doesn't become obsolete or redundant? How can we think about our solutions in a way that's resilient to change? And the reality is that we're innovating right now in a time of tremendous change, right? Everything from new technology that many of you are actively working on at the moment that is designed to disrupt what the standard of care is right now, to new financial pressures that are coming as a result of dramatic population changes, to a completely new set of human-centered behaviors that are challenging how a paternalistic healthcare system has historically worked. So all these things are creating fundamental disruption when at the same time people are actively striving to find balance. And I really challenged my team to say, if all this disruption is happening around us, how do we at the very least ensure the things that we're creating don't disappear the moment that something changes? And that really kind of brings us to today. So my team and I set out to do something that I can only call incredibly ambitious. We decided to create a book to basically try and understand where the future of care will take place. And it may seem absolutely crazy, and many people have told me that it actually is, but we diverted a lot of resources to it. We spent roughly an entire year researching and developing a piece of content that is in front of you that I'm going to take you through today, called The Futures of Health, Places and Spaces of Care. It took about 20 team members at various points in time, kind of intersecting with the program. We also, after going through this process, validated the content with 150 global health leaders because, obviously anthropologists and service designers can have perspective and can interpret content, but if you've ever tried to do design in a hospital, at the end of the day, if a doctor says no, it's not real. So beyond that, we also collected hundreds and hundreds of different signals of change that are occurring. And today what I really wanted to do is share with you one section of this book and how it's really impacted how we as a team approach design. So again, crazy ambitious project, but what were the goals of it? We really had three kind of primary goals. The first one was to try and identify what are the different things that are changing in care right now. What are those activities that are taking place that are challenging the paradigms of how care is delivered? Second to that, we wanted to take those things, those little signals, and transform them into a series of communicated shifts. Where are we today, and what are we moving towards in the future? And we wanted to do all this not just so that we could create another trend report or document it for the sake of thought leadership. We actually did it because we wanted to give back to ourselves, give back to the people that we're designing for, and give back to a broader community by identifying a series of principles that can actually be applied to the design that people are actively doing today. And so what did we actually do over the course of those 12 months? For about 6 months, we spent time collecting a series of signals. I'll take you through what signals are, but these are basically little hints about what's occurring actively at the moment. From there, we identified these major themes and shifts, and we developed a set of design principles that are really meant to be actionable things that we can apply to the things that we're creating at the moment. Now, of course, that's where things would typically end, but we're also a design firm, so we had to have a little bit of fun for ourselves. And so we did the last thing that you wouldn't typically expect, which is we actually created a series of scenarios or vignettes around what the future will look like. And I'm going to take you through a few examples of these today. But we actually went through the process of both writing the stories, so you can think of them as little tidbits of science fiction, and then also went through the process of visualizing what some of these would look like. And again, this isn't just for the sake of it, this was purpose-driven work for us. So, to most people, this might seem like, first of all, absolutely ridiculous, and then secondly, as this far-out process of complete science fiction. But in fact, for us, it's a process that really brings together both logic and intuition. So on one hand, certainly you can start to move forward by identifying trends that are occurring. But as we move further and further out from today, those trends become less and less viable in predicting the future because so much is actively changing. And it's only through this additional process of speculation that we can start to think about how we can actually make our work sustainable. And I'm happy to kind of take you through the journey. So aside from being frustrating as you were trying to sit down, many of you had a piece of paper that was on the chair. For those of you in the back, you won't actually have them. But there was an intent around these pieces of paper. So maybe you can kind of pull them in and put them on your laps for a moment. So the process of creating this piece was again as much for external people as it is for ourselves. This is a piece of content that we regularly now use as part of our design process, and it's kind of impossible to facilitate a room of 50 people when there's just one person. So, of course, you do what you do as a designer, and you create a piece of paper that hopefully gets you to start doing some work. So, we really wanted to create these pieces as a jumping off point or as a starting point. So, what you can see is in the middle, I am A or I am building an. And I know each of you guys here are actively involved in either the hacking community or the flexible user experience community or the healthcare community. So what I would say for one moment, if you're a doctor or a nurse, right, you're a doctor or a nurse in the middle. If you're working on a tech startup right now in healthcare, write down what it is in the middle. So if you can take a moment to just do that right now, that would be great, because it lets me drink some of my coffee. People told you that there was audience participation, right? Yes? Okay, good. And if you do the work, there's a book in it at the end for you too. If that's added motivation. I see a little bit of writing. Thank you. So if this is you today, or what you're building today, that thing in the middle, let's talk about what's on the outside. Those 4 quadrants are 4 scenarios that I'm going to take you through today, all of which represent a different view of what the future of care may look like. And how do we use this as a team for ourselves? When we're doing things like developing out new solutions, what we'll often do is put them right in the middle of this type of grid, and then we'll then explore exactly how that solution needs to change in order to accommodate these different variations of what the future looks like. So it starts to give us a view of what can we do today in order to make sure that if these futures do come to life, what we've created is resilient enough to adapt to it. So I'm going to make you work. Now, through all of this, again, it doesn't sound like there's a ton of user experience people here, but what I need to stress through this process is also that this is not an exercise in patient journey mapping or person journey mapping. And I'm sure many of you have kind of used the tools and methods of journey mapping in the past. If you haven't, in journey mapping, you're identifying a whole series of touch points that a persona or a person will interact with. And usually what you're doing is introducing your solution into it and telling everybody that all the problems go away. The reality is that this is, in fact, the inverse of it. What we're trying to do is really identify how do all of those different touch points that somebody experiences change in the future in order to make sure that the things that we're building can work for those possible futures, which is actually a really exciting counterpoint and allows us to start planning for some of the disruptions that are likely to happen. So, with the remaining time, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we created. So, after we went through this extensive exercise, we really identified 5 major themes of change. The first theme really explored the different questions of who lives with illness and how mobility of communities really impacts care. That's the health delivery and community care one. The second one, which is the piece that I'm going to speak about today, is specifically about new approaches to treatment or redefining treatment and the relationships associated with it. The third, which is specifically about technology, is about how technology and our trust in technology are fundamentally reframing how we think about enhancing our bodies. The fourth is about treatment and prevention in worlds that are individualized or alternatively based solely on statistics. And the last one, which I think is the most fun because it's the most controversial, actually gets specifically into the tensions between quality and quantity of life and money. So all very exciting. And what I can say is that through this exercise, again, these themes were actually validated with global health leaders, and every one of them received over an 80% score in terms of its importance to the future of healthcare and changes that are actively occurring. So, how did we actually get there? Like I mentioned before, we went through a process of identifying all of these different signals of change that were occurring. From there, we identified a series of different shifts that informed worldviews or fundamentally different perspectives on what the future of care would look like that then allowed us to use them as jumping off point for scenarios. And we started out with signals. Rather than going through a whole list of really cool and interesting stuff that's occurring, what I'll say is that we did our homework. Number one, we spent a tremendous amount of time understanding examples of shifting population data and shifting behaviors that are actually happening. From there, we also looked at new and emerging models of care. This is just one that I love talking about and reinforcing. It's a center that I got to visit in Minneapolis, where the only thing that's special about it is everything about how the care is delivered, nothing about the facility. So they use a fully coordinated care model for people living with Parkinson's, and it's absolutely tremendous. We also spent a lot of time looking at just important and cool topics that are popping up in the news related to how care is delivered. So, for example, we found a lot of instances of people specifically publishing about travel and healthcare and medical tourism. We also, of course, looked at new and emerging businesses that are taking place and trends specifically related to that are disrupting models of care and various models of treatment. I'm sure most of you are probably very familiar with this example, specifically as the first prescribed app. And then we also went into interesting policy debates that are actively happening. Not because we can necessarily predict the outcomes of them, but because we wanted to understand what's the gray zone that currently exists. Now, from all of these different signals that were occurring, we then identified a series of different shifts. What are the major movements from here to there that are occurring right now as it relates to treatment? And in this particular chapter, there were 6 major shifts. So the first shift was about the movement from treating symptoms to treating people holistically. Once siloed specialties, once siloed into specialty, once in healthcare, people were very siloed into specialties. And now there's an increasing recognition of broad lifestyle factors and their impact on disease. So from there, we have mind and body separation to today a greater sense of interconnectedness that's happening. So in healthcare, there's a historic reference to treating the mind and body fundamentally separately, and increasingly you're seeing in some of the best models of coordinated care how effective treatment of disease also includes psychology, psychiatry, other aspects of meditation and well-being. I know there's a number of projects that people are actually actively working on around here that specifically deal with this topic. We had the transition from dealing specifically with medication to looking at medication, products, apps, diets, fashion, etc., all as different ways of impacting people's health outcomes. We have a movement from curing acute conditions to chronic disease management. Obviously we're all aware that the infrastructure of care has been very much set up to deal with acute conditions specifically, and now there's an increasing focus on creating systems that better support chronic disease management. We have a transition from the classic consultation to now a developing caring relationship with healthcare practitioners with a deep understanding of how that has the ability to impact health outcomes. And finally, from treatment to this new world of treatment, prevention, and health promotion. So whereas we used to be very focused on just treating disease, now truly global health efforts are focused well beyond that into prevention and general health promotion with a lot of money and investment behind it. So I went through that very quickly, but I went through that very quickly because I think we can all appreciate that those are important shifts that are actively happening right now in how care is delivered. And what actually becomes more interesting is once we start to dig into how does that affect the views of the future or the future kind of worldviews. And having gone through this process, what we identified was 2 kind of major tensions that are currently happening specifically within this space of new treatment. First of all, we see this tremendous tension that's happening between the idea of what we would refer to as ad hoc impersonal treatment. So, for example, with a recognition that there's increasingly less resources actively available, pressures of of growing populations, and more transient individuals, the idea of an ad hoc structured system is actually much more convenient to support them. In contrast to that, we also know that when you look at outcomes models, that emphasis on partnerships and collaboration between healthcare practitioners and people living with diseases results in better outcomes and an expanded relationship. So you've got two different ends of the spectrum. On one hand, the closer that healthcare practitioners get with people living with disease, the better the outcomes. On the flip side, you have this issue of access, and the more time that every practitioner spends with an individual, of course, that means that there's less resources that are available to everyone else. So this is one fundamental tension that we see currently occurring and impacting where the future of care will go. In parallel to that, we see this other kind of interesting tension. So almost like a tension between complacency or treating independent experiences. With the recognition that care is obviously available in many, many different forms. Right now we know that the patient more often than not, or the person living with disease, is carrying the burden of trying to bring everything together and coordinate it. I see lots of nods again because I know in some instances people have developed specific technologies around that. On the flip side, you have this emerging world of integrative, holistic treatment that's actively happening. So in these instances, the responsibilities and resources for treatment are really diffused across a broad spectrum of stakeholders, but have the ability to be kind of well coordinated together. So what does this tell us? It tells us that there's a lot of shifts that are happening, and it tells us, at least in terms of how we explored this particular section, that there's these two fundamental shifts that are pulling us into completely different views of what the world looks like. And rather than just sitting back and saying, okay, that's fine, we know that now, we actually wanted to go through the process of exploring what that actually means. And so we went through a process of actually creating scenarios around that, so specific stories. And what I'm actually going to do is flip from presenter mode to storybook mode, if you'll all indulge me a little bit, and share with you 4 distinct scenarios that come from this book. I've actually been looking forward to this part. The first scenario we're going to explore is called the hub, and it sits at the intersection of ad hoc impersonal treatment and care and the integrative holistic treatment. Damn it, Jane thought. Crouching to tie her shoelace, the shadow of the sick bus moving past her, darkening the room for a brief second. She saw it pass by and was vaguely aware of what it meant. She only had seconds to get to the corner before it left. It was good that she lived so close. She stood up gingerly because she was feeling horrible. Everything was hard to do, to breathe, to move, to care about anything beyond going back to bed. But she needed to get to work, which meant she needed to catch this particular bus. She grabbed her bag and ran from her house as quick as her aching, laggard legs would take her. The nurse yelled at her to scan her wristband and to sit down before the bus started moving. From one of the first floor's many couches, she noticed that this bus was really no different from the one that she took to work. The only thing that distinguished the two was the nurse in her white lab coat and the group of people who were already jacked into the computer. Some had IV bags and were already receiving their treatment. She dutifully found the reader to let the system know that she was seated and ready for her interview. While she waited, she tried to remember how it all came to this. 5 years ago, TriMed Corporation began running these small clinics at her office. They were just another contractor her company had hired to manage the healthcare of its employees. Her company decided to eliminate its health plan to replace the system of fully paid health providers to care for employees. She remembered that it was a flat fee system that allowed her to do this, meaning anything special like this bus cost her extra. She wondered to herself, wasn't this damn bus the product of the innovation project that the HR team did last year? It was, by the way. All they did was combine our employee commuter bus with the healthcare clinic. Bastards. While she was lost in thought, the nurse had come over and wordlessly hooked her up into the system. She went limp and allowed the nurse to put the tensor on. When she was hooked in, the screen burst to life and she was told to wait for the doctor to arrive and to relax. And she was in good hands. A number of commercials for the pharmaceutical companies that made the new models of treatments flashed onto the screen. There were even ads for a few local restaurants. That was the laugh moment, by the way. After about a 5-minute wait, a blissfully short time, the screen went dark, and she was put into the waiting room of Dr. Cater. Jane had seen this woman on the bus before. She put her card back into the slot just under the screen so that the doctor would be able to access her medical records. And Dr. Cater walked into view and said, "Good morning, I'm Dr. Cater. What can I do for you?" "I'm feeling really ill today. I woke up feeling nauseous and have a low-grade fever. It's nothing major, but I really need to get to work today." "Thank you. Let's take a look." Dr. Cater focused on the screen in her hands, reading and scrolling to change the view or to manipulate an image every once in a while. Occasionally, she would look up into the cameras or at something next to the camera. "Have you uploaded your recent exercise data to the system? I don't see it here. I also don't see that last night's sleep." "Yeah, sorry, I forgot to wear my wristband yesterday and in bed last night," Jane replied. "Well, not to worry. It looks like you have mild inflammation and a minor bacterial imbalance in your stomach. You've probably been eating the wrong kinds of foods and been under too much stress at work. Otherwise, your vitals are normal. Please watch the how-to video again on the importance of monitoring your gut flora and make sure you follow the suggestions to consume only foods that will increase your good bacteria. I suggest you use the stress leave note I'm sending you now for the rest of the week," Dr. Cater said. A short while later, the nurse arrived with Jane's treatment cocktail of smart bacteria that would secrete anti-inflammatory molecules and encourage the growth of beneficial bacteria she was low on, which would get her through the workday. She sipped on it slowly and then settled in to work for the rest of the trip. She'd be at work soon, and she was already beginning to feel better. I forgot to mention that most of the scenarios are sort of post-apocalyptic views of the future. In this first scenario, which is really that intersection of ad hoc, impersonal care and a holistic view, what you can start to see is some ideas come to life, right? You've got urgent care and on-demand care treatment services that are ultimately the preferred way of accessing care. Now, obviously, this is hopefully in a slightly different system than what's available in Canada, given the private nature that it's built around. But you can start to see how this impersonal and on-demand nature starts to affect what a person's experience can actually be. You also have this idea of unconventional stakeholders and treatments that have emerged, and it's based around a more holistic approach to care. So what I want you to do just for a moment is on those worksheets that you have, you've got scenario A. What I want you to do is, based on whatever you've written in the middle, write what has changed for you specifically based on an understanding of that scenario, and what would you need to do differently in order to accommodate it. As a side note, there's a list of things that have changed on the side. That's the Griffins. There are also books for completed cards. Patients with benefits. Brian had been waiting for a hip replacement surgery and to have a few of his more minor psychological issues addressed for some time. Recent changes to his private insurance plan mean he can now choose from a wide array of out-of-country care options. Changes to his health insurance means he's qualified for medical tourism tax credits that are now supported by several Western public systems, as well as more conservative private payers looking to reduce their costs. Brian's plans had opened up options to various procedures, treatments, and to wellness packages delivered in exotic destinations around the world. His wife is also covered under his plan, and although she does not require any immediate medical treatment, she looks forward to spending time with her husband throughout his care and indulging in some of the preventative offerings that are built into most packages. I can only assume that means all-inclusive, by the way. Together, they've been browsing and daydreaming about a number of all-inclusive, longer-term care packages, and have even consulted their children to get a sense of the best care and comfort for Brian, as well as his family when they come to visit during his recovery. Because it's taking place during the cold winter months, the trip will also be kind of a holiday. Due to the economic demands and pressures on Western healthcare systems, such as shifting values and new coverage and incentive plans, a number of tourism-friendly destinations have rapidly applied their expertise in hospitality services to include world-class medical treatment and procedures. The experience and the process of browsing and booking all-inclusive travel packages for longer-term care is providing significant options to patients who would have typically waited a long time for procedures and less efficient care from within their home countries. At the same time, an interesting alignment is that many of the clients are of an aging population who've traditionally sought warmer places to go during the winter months. This has created a predictable cycle of treatment and long-term recovery demands that many new medical tours and businesses can design around in the future. I kind of like that future a little better, personally. But in this instance, we have an opportunity to kind of see this idea of lasting relationships. Now, while the idea of lasting doesn't totally come across just how it's described, with a recognition of how, for example, loyalty programs are developed for hotels, you start to see really interesting intersections between ideas like CRM and healthcare. And of course, there's a holistic option. So in these instances, people are receiving long-term care, and the system is ultimately adopting and adapting for demands from an aging population and changing investment needs. People are empowered to access different types of healthcare, and they're supported by non-traditional health payers. Again, just kind of take a moment, fill out what has changed that affects you at the middle, and what are the new skills and capabilities that you might start to see evolve.
I like that idea.
You're supposed to be writing things down, too. So just to show you how this exercise works, this one's actually from a fundamentally different perspective. And it is called compatible care. It sits at the intersection of ad hoc impersonal treatment and treating independent symptoms. Dr. Mike is looking for new patients to build up his online practice. The demand for ad hoc encounters on a patient's terms means that the mobile MD business is busier than ever. Treating people remotely through the internet has turned into such a big business that Dr. Mike now checks his doctor-patient compatibility app that serves up potential matches on almost a moment-by-moment basis. Dr. Mike flips through and glances at patient profiles, bookmarking those that he may reach out to. In a results-driven market where everything is tracked and rated, he wants to maximize his outcome potential and ratings. To do this, Dr. Mike seeks compatibility and the right balance of patients that he can have a positive impact on, and those that will help him maximize his treatment score. In addition to connecting with patients who are using the now ubiquitous automated health kiosks found at shopping malls and grocery stores, Dr. Mike frequently conducts in-person diagnostics in coffee shops and public parks, places where patients feel most comfortable. He also has a membership with a number of well-equipped clinics that facilitate connections between HCPs and patients. When required, he simply books the required space and coordinates appointments with his patients. To expand his patient base and repertoire, he's built up a strong, well-rated relationship with a number of different medical specialists, alternative treatment specialists, and service providers in neuroplasticity, and those using sensory integration techniques who are found exclusively on this network. While sipping his coffee, he scrolls through and reads some suggested profiles. Sandra is one of the 5 highly compatible patients seeking a general checkup, validation of personal treatment benchmarks, and the renewal of prescriptions. The compatibility rating is good, so Dr. Mike establishes contact, previews her EHR, and authenticates the relationship before proceeding with the session. At a glance, he views her wearable data, blood pressure, stress levels, mood scores, kilometers traveled on foot in the past month, all of which indicate no obvious abnormalities. This rapid assessment, in addition to the patient's history with others in the network, show that Sandra has a good adherence record and is making progress towards her previously established benchmarks and goals. Dr. Mike can see that Sandra is online and pings her to proceed. The two connect, and the application sets up a secure channel and runs a quick diagnostic, which also helps to authenticate Sandra's identity. Dr. Mike looks at the data as it comes in on his mobile. There's a shared view, and he talks Sandra through what they're both seeing. After briefly discussing the results, they agree to update her treatment plan, benchmarks, and next steps and he puts the benchmarks and next steps on Sandra's EHR. Dr. Mike validates her progress, fills out the prescription, and orders it to be delivered to her house. Less than 1 hour later, Sandra receives the delivery from a local courier. Post-checkup, the two of them are reminded to rate the encounter. He sends Sandra a personal note. Another happy patient. So that one probably feels a lot closer, actually, than, again, probably challenges that many of you are working on. But again, as it relates to compatible care, in this instance, we're seeing many treating many conditions independently and in an ad hoc, on-demand way, with a wide variety of different types of practitioners that can occur. And obviously there's a lot of technology in this instance that is involved, but many that are the types of things that are already currently actively available, only obviously to a greater extent dealing with issues of privacy and place. Now, of course, navigating many relationships between stakeholders' brands can still remain quite challenging. But many of these interactions are taking place through existing peer-to-peer social channels that are now being adapted for a new set of behaviors. So just take a moment, and we're going to move on to the last, and where the end is near. The last scenario is fashion treatment. Since being diagnosed with seasonal affectiveness disorder, May has decided to enhance her treatment plan, developed by her family doctor by engaging with a number of specialists and non-traditional providers that help her manage her spectrum of overlapping symptoms. Patients like May are ready and willing to explore new approaches and are learning about how colors, shapes, materials, patterns, and prints can improve wellness. Comfortable with communicating through digital channels, she's also more open to holistic approaches and to finding treatment alternatives that reduce the amount of medication required to manage her symptoms. She's been building her own treatment team based on recommendations in her various social networks. At the same time, May's doctor is trying to understand the best way to participate in this new care ecology. Several formal and informal providers are all linked together on her preferred health platform. Over time, and since being diagnosed, May has been adding new treatment alternatives to this virtual care space in the same way she adds apps to her phone. One new specialist application, recently launched by a global apparel brand and a pharmaceutical giant in partnership, links her directly with personal style and color therapists that help her leverage her wardrobe towards improving everything from her stress levels and circulation to her social and emotional well-being. Her primary care doctor, Ada, started off a bit lost in terms of finding the best way to help her navigate this new path. She's since quickly learned about these new approaches because her patients were either requesting information about them or they were already engaging in them. She had to keep up. Now that she's learned more about these alternatives, Ada is trying hard to manage all these new relationships, finding time to have the right conversations with multiple individuals and groups who are involved in May's highly personalized alternative treatment path. May's nutritionist, yoga instructor, dog walker, and personal style therapist, who helps May manage her day-to-day mood and emotions, are all learning to speak this new alternative language. It's been difficult, but it was necessary in order to stay connected and relevant to a new generation of people with diseases. May's not feeling too excited about the day ahead. Her earbuds pick up something in her mood. Sensing that something is not quite right, the device performs a quick search and begins to play from an appropriately designed media playlist, tipping her to a restaurant where she can socialize with a few others in her care group, and making a subsequent recommendation for a wardrobe change. The app prescribes a kinetic sweater that provides a variety of mechanical and haptic cues and sensations that help to stimulate and regulate emotional states for an improved sense of well-being. Together, these various things help to improve her mood, which in turn helps May to manage her condition. So as you can tell through this exercise, we are not in a place to pass judgment. What we are in a place to do is to try and bring things together. And in this instance, what we have is a series of lasting and independent interactions where patients are really trying to build a long-term treatment with a variety of different non-traditional health providers. Network care models obviously help to facilitate this and allow different healthcare practitioners to pursue better treatment outcomes altogether. So this is your last writing down activity. I'll give you a moment, and then we'll wrap up what the future of care might look like. And what I love about these things, especially given that they've been video recorded, is not only might some of these be inherently controversial based on the types of practices that are outlined, of course, I see a lot of head nodding there. They absolutely might even further be ridiculous, and in years from now, when inevitably I review this, I might say, oh my gosh, we were so far off, or this is so absolutely crazy, or this has absolutely been debunked. But in terms of today, the moment today, the process of collecting signals actually allowed us to establish these as plausible, possible worlds moving forward. And it's not about the scenarios themselves. It's that the act of developing them actually forced us to think differently about what care looked like. And the act of considering them on a regular basis actually forces us to adjust our thinking about where the world will actually go. So the further out we try and speculate, the less certain ultimately we are. If I was to say this was a book about 2017, you would all tell me I'm absolutely crazy. You're probably thinking about this being 2025 as well. But to put something together that just provides commentary on tomorrow, I think most of us can be relatively certain about what tomorrow will look like. As we go further and further out, the process of speculation and the process of trying to insert the types of things that we're creating and building actually help us think about what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're creating. So in terms of how this actually impacts what we do, as I mentioned before, I have a design practice with 20 different practitioners all actively creating different types of interventions for people living with chronic diseases, different types of experiences interacting with the health system. And the process of creating this actually allows us to think about who we are, what we do, and change how we approach things. First, it allows us to align on values. I can certainly tell you that I do not want a healthcare practitioner having a numerical match with me in order to determine whether they serve me or not. That to me, I recognize that there are signals that are pointing towards that, but the process of me actually passing judgment and having a perspective on it actually allows me to start shaping and influencing the types of interactions that I'm designing. It also allows me to test strategy. So as we start to devise different approaches or things that we're building through, it allows us to say, in these futures, would this hold true? Is this real? Would this work? And if not, it allows us to think about how. It also allows us to, I think actually most importantly, build out a new set of capabilities. Because again, each of these shifts are pulling us in different directions. And if we think about how that might look in the future, it allows us to bring on a new set of capabilities today. So I've actually hired 4 different practitioners into my practice, including somebody focused on health economics and outcome data, specifically because of the work that we went through in this process. Not because I'm trying to build to one of these specific worlds, but I know it's relevant and important to people who are actively designing in the space, and so I want to bring it. So this really helps us imagine a new set of capabilities that we want to build as a team. I would say even beyond that, it helps us start to afford different types of possible functions into the things that we're building out. And for those of you who are thinking specifically about different types of technologies that you're building, the process of actually placing them in these future scenarios can actually allow you to start thinking through different types of features and functions that you might want to include in the future. I would say most importantly, they also help us decide on what future it is that we actually want. So we can actually make ethical decisions about our design process based on where the future of care may actually be going. So just kind of in closing, many of you who kind of actively participate in the design process know those classic kind of 4 steps that happen at the top. You first define a problem, you go through a process of researching it in order to inform a concept and then ultimately test it. In parallel to that, we use this process to also anticipate what are the different signals of change, how do we apply different design principles to influence what we're creating, and then how viable is what we're creating based on these future scenarios. And kind of in closing, what I would say is we have a lot of different views of the future, but none of these are necessarily going to happen. In the future, these may be very, 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 very wrong, and hopefully in many instances they are. But they're only actually going to be wrong if we're actively making ethical decisions about the type of design that we're creating, and in parallel to that, also thinking about how we bring things to people living with different diseases or who are intersecting with the health system on a regular basis, things that they can continue to use for a long term into the future. So in closing, you all kind of went through the process of filling out these cards. One last thing, because obviously this is a networking event, and it can always, especially with the number of new people who are here tonight, it can always be a little awkward to introduce yourselves and meet other people. So what I would also suggest is there's 4 different worlds that have been created. There's 4 corners to this room, technically 5. If you don't want to participate, I guess stay in the middle. But what I would ask you to do is, we'll call it A, B, C, D. Based on what world you actually want to engage with or talk to other people with, just hang out in a corner. And hopefully meet some like-minded people and challenge them on what they think the future of care would be. So please feel free to reach out, talk to me. If you've completed your card, that's the one requirement. There's a copy of the book that's here and available for you for free. Just make sure that you've completed the card. That's my one request. And we're actually going through this exact same strategic foresight exercise. The first one was specifically to identify places and spaces of care. The next one is actually specifically about the future of aging. So I have a team actually halfway through an exercise of envisioning what is the future of aging. So if you're interested in discussing that, if you're interested in participating in the process of writing scenarios, we're looking for people to actively engage in it. So please come talk to me or reach out. So thank you all very much, and hopefully this has kind of challenged your perspective on both what a talk is, but in addition to that, on what the future of care looks like. So thank you.